I know well that many of my readers do not think as I do. This also is most natural and confirms the theorem. For although my opinions may turn out erroneous, there will always remain the fact that many of those dissonant readers have never given 5 minutes thought to this complex matter. How are they going to think as I do? But by believing that they have a right to an opinion on the matter without previous effort to work one out for themselves, they prove patently that they belong to that absurd type of human being which I have called the rebel mass. It is precisely what I mean by having one's soul obliterated, hermetically closed. Here it would be the special case of intellectual hermeticism. The individual finds himself already with a stock of ideas. He decides to content himself with them and to consider himself intellectually complete. As he feels the lack of nothing outside himself, he settles down definitely amid his mental furniture. Such is the mechanism of self-obliteration. The mass man regards himself as perfect. The select man, in order to regard himself so, needs to be specially vain, and the belief in his perfection is not united with him consubstantially. It is not ingenuous, but arises from his vanity, and even for himself has a fictitious, imaginary, problematic character. Hence, the vain man stands in need of others. He seeks in them support for the idea that he wishes to have of himself, so that not even in this diseased state, not even when blinded by vanity, does the quote, noble unquote man succeed in feeling himself in truth complete. Contrariwise, it never occurs to the mediocre man of our days, to the new Adam, to doubt of his own plentitude. His self-confidence is, like Adam's, paradisiacal. The innate hermeticism of his soul is an obstacle to the necessary condition for his discovery of his insufficiency, namely, a comparison of himself with other beings. To compare himself would mean to go out of himself for a moment and to transfer himself to his neighbor. But the mediocre soul is incapable of transmigration, the supreme form of sport. We find ourselves, then, met with the same difference that eternally exists between the fool and the man of sense. The latter is constantly catching himself within an inch of being a fool. Hence, he makes an effort to escape from the imminent folly, and in that effort lies his intelligence. The fool, on the other hand, does not suspect himself. He thinks himself the most prudent of men. Hence, the inviolable tranquility with which the fool settles down, installs himself in his own folly. Like those insects which it is impossible to extract from the orifice they inhabit, there is no way of dislodging the fool from his folly, to take him away for a while from his blind state and to force him to contrast his own dull vision with other keener forms of sight. The fool is a fool for life. He is devoid of pores. This is why Anatole France said that the fool is much worse than the knave. For the knave does take a rest sometimes. The fool never. However, it is not a question of the mass man being a fool. On the contrary, today he is more clever, has more capacity of understanding than his fellow of any previous period. But that capacity is of no use to him. In reality, the vague feeling that he possesses, it seems only to shut him up more within himself and keep him from using it. Once for all, he accepts the stock of commonplaces, prejudices, fag ends of ideas, or simply empty words which chance has piled up within his mind, and with a boldness only explicable by his ingenuousness, is prepared to impose them everywhere. This is what in my first chapter I laid down as the characteristic of our time. Not that the vulgar believes itself super excellent and not vulgar, but that the vulgar proclaims and imposes the right of vulgarity or vulgarity as a right. The command over public life exercised today by the intellectually vulgar is perhaps the factor of the present situation which is most novel, least assimilable to anything in the past. At least in European history up to the present, the vulgar had never believed itself to have ideas on things. It had beliefs, traditions, experiences, proverbs, mental habits, but it never imagined itself in possession of theoretical opinions on what things are or ought to be, for example, on politics or literature. What politicians planned or carried out seemed good or bad to it, it granted or withheld its support. Skipping ahead a little bit, the necessary consequence of this was that the vulgar never thought, even remotely, of making a decision on any one of the public activities, which in their greater part are theoretical in character. Today, on the other hand, the average man has the most mathematical ideas on all that happens or ought to happen in the universe. Hence, he has lost the use of his hearing. Why should he listen if he has within him all that is necessary? There is no reason for listening, but rather for judging, pronouncing, deciding. There is no question concerning public life in which he does not intervene, blind and deaf as he is, imposing his opinions. But is this not an advantage? Is it not a sign of immense progress that the masses should have ideas? That is to say, should be cultured? By no means. The ideas of the average man are not genuine ideas, nor is their possession culture. An idea is putting truth in checkmate. Whoever wishes to have ideas must first prepare himself to desire truth and to accept the rule of the game imposed by it. It is no use speaking of ideas when there is no acceptance of a higher authority to regulate them, a series of standards to which it is possible to appeal in a discussion. These standards are the principles on which culture rests. I am not concerned with the form they take. What I affirm is that there is no culture where there are no standards to which our fellow men can have recourse. There is no culture where there are no principles of legality to which to appeal. There is no culture where there is no acceptance of certain final intellectual positions to which a dispute may be referred. There is no culture where economic relations are not subject to a regulating principle to protect interest involved. There is no culture where aesthetic controversy does not recognize the necessity of justifying the work of art. When all these things are lacking, there is no culture. There is, in the strictest sense of the word, barbarism. And let us not deceive ourselves. This is what is beginning to appear in Europe under the progressive rebellion of the masses. The traveler who arrives in a barbarous country knows that in that territory there are no ruling principles to which it is possible to appeal. Properly speaking, there are no barbarian standards. Barbarism is the absence of standards to which appeal can be made. Anyone can observe that in Europe, for some years past, strange things have begun to happen. To give a concrete example of these strange things, I shall name certain political movements, such as syndicalism and fascism. We must not think that they seem strange simply because they are new. The enthusiasm for novelty is so innate in the European that it has resulted in his producing the most unsettled history of all known to us. The element of strangeness in these new facts is not to be attributed to the element of novelty, but to the extraordinary form taken by these new things. Under the species of syndicalism and fascism, there appears for the first time in Europe a type of man who does not want to give reasons or to be right, but simply shows himself resolved to impose his opinions. This is the new thing, the right not to be reasonable, the reason of unreason. Here, I see the most palpable manifestation of the new mentality of the masses, due to their having decided to rule society without having the capacity for doing so. In their political conduct, the structure of the new mentality is revealed in the rawest, most convincing manner, but the key to it lies in intellectual hermeticism. The average man finds himself with ideas in his head, but he lacks the faculty of ideation. He has no conception even of the rare atmosphere in which ideas live. He wishes to have opinions, but is unwilling to accept the conditions and presuppositions that underline all opinions. Hence, his ideas are in fact nothing more than appetites in words, something like musical romanzas. To have an idea means believing one is in possession of the reasons for having it, and consequently means believing that there is such a thing as reason, a world of intelligible truths. To have ideas, to form opinions, is identical with appealing to such an authority, submitting oneself to it, accepting its code and its decisions, and therefore believing that the highest form of intercommunion is the dialogue in which the reasons for our ideas are discussed. But the mass man would feel himself lost if he accepted discussion, and instinctively repudiates the obligations of accepting that supreme authority lying outside himself. Hence, the new thing in Europe is to have done with discussions, and detestation is expressed for all forms of intercommunion which imply acceptance of objective standards ranging from conversation to parliament and taking in science. This means that there is a renunciation of the common life based on culture, which is subject to standards, and a return to the common life of barbarism. All the normal processes are suppressed in order to arrive directly at the imposition of what is desired. The hermeticism of the soul, which, as we have seen before, urges the mass to intervene in the whole of public life, also inevitably leads it to one single process of intervention: direct action.